So you probably have been building stuff like this, which is very cool. It's an N8N automation, and you create a chat and use the chat and store the information, and then you actually display this on Excel. And all these automations are very useful, but the truth is, if you're going to give this to a client, you just won't know what to do with it, and it's not an interface they actually like. And the truth is, you're not selling the automation itself, you're selling a result, and part of that result is how you actually present it. So today I'm going to show you how you can take an application just like this, where you have an ugly N8N chat like this and turn it into something way beautiful that your client can actually use. And I'm going to do the same and take a result that was being sent to a Google Sheet and change it to an actually full application like this, where your client can actually see the results and not have to rely on using some weird chat and some Excel sheets. Before we get started, if this is interesting, make sure to join my school community. For now it's free, I'll be adding some courses there that will guide you from beginner to expert on N8N, automation and vibe coding, as well as some content creation. And with that said, let's get started. This is the base flow we're going to use for example. We can see we start with a simple chat. Chat is using a response mode. Then we have a get row. What this is we have a bunch of rows on a table, a data table, that are storing all the information info. We start by actually getting all the information from that session ID, because every time you start a chat, you have a session ID, and this is what makes sure you're using the same session and that you can identify the user. So when I start a chat, for example, if I say hi, we can see I'm getting rows. In this case, I don't have anything. I'm always outputting data, that's why this is empty. But we can see we're using our session ID, and we have our message here. So then we go to the next node, which is aggregate. Again, since we didn't have anything before, this will also not have anything. Then we actually message a model. And here I have a long prompt that you can copy. But basically we're giving all the data we aggregated before. In this case, nothing, but it's usually be a conversation. And then we give it the actual current message so that it generates a response. After that, we insert that response into a row, and we can see we again do the session ID, which are getting from the first element. We insert the user message, then we set the response, which in this case is set by this long expression. And we can see that after this, if we refresh, now we have a session ID, the message we just sent, and the reply. So if I continue, for example, if I ask, I need to know more about sports law, and I send a message, we can see now it got an item. In this case, the item is what we stored before. So we've got the user message, the system reply, and the session ID. Since it is the same session, all the information will be stored with the same ID. I can see that I have a reply. And if I now look into my data table and I refresh, I can see I have a new line with the rest of the conversation. Lastly, I'm just responding to the chat with this info, and this is why you see a response here. So this is the first part of the system. The second one is an aggregator, which I'm going to run. What this does is gets all the sessions. So I go to this table, I'm getting everything. Then I'm using this JavaScript to group them into sessions. So the data, as you can see, is like this. So I have a row for each entry of the tables, and then I group, and now I have a session ID with all the items from that session. And what this allows me is to ask the agent to create a summary of each interaction with the information gathered, if there was a meeting schedule, and the date of the conversation. And then I store all of this in an Excel sheet. You can see here, this is the result. So this system can be very useful for someone that has a company, but there are several problems with it. First of all, the chat here is only accessible if you actually use N8N. You can quickly fix this, you can change here, you make it publicly available. And now if we actually activate it and go to the link, we can now talk with it. This will work the same, it will have a session ID, and this will be exactly the same as you had before. Let's give it a second to actually reply. You can see we have a reply. This is slightly better, but it's still not very user-friendly. I mean, if you give this to a client, you probably wouldn't like it. So we need a different approach to solving this. And the way to do this is to actually vibe code our own front end in this case. So how can we do this? So let's start with the chat. Let's actually remove this. And let's create a new webhook node. We can give it a path, for example. I'm going to call my sample chat. The method will be post, and we want to respond using a response to webhook. So this will be the starting point, which will link here. And then we need to remove the respond to chat and actually make it a respond to webhook. So there we go. We now have a webhook that we can call. With this webhook, we can create a front end or an actual application where the users can interact and they don't know they're using N8N. So how do we do this? The first step is to go to the Google AI Studio, and we have this little build tab, so let's just click it. And we can see we can actually describe our idea. So this is what I would say to it. I want you to create a chat application. The chat should call this endpoint. And to get the actual endpoint it needs to call, you need to go to your N8N flow. You click the webhook, you open, and then we have either a test or a production URL. The difference is that with the test URL, you need to actually run every time you want to have a conversation. With the production, it just keeps running. So for now, I'm just going to use the test, and I'll copy it, and I'll actually execute this flow, and I'll paste it here, and then we have and pass the following arguments, the session ID and the chat input. These are the two we need, and then we just tell it should wait for a reply. So let's click build and just wait for a minute. Now that it's finished, we can see it says hello, I'm your assistant connected to N8N, how can I help you today? And I'm just going to say something like, hi, I have questions about sports law, and I'm going to send this. And we can see we got an error. So we can go back to N8N. This is actually not running, so let's try again. Let's send the same question. What happened is because we didn't actually manually trigger and we are testing, we need to go and manually trigger, so no message was received. So now that I've activated, I can send and it should receive a response. And we can see we received the empty response from the server. Why did this happen? We can see there's an error, so let's open it. And we can see here there's the error. This is because we changed our chat into a webhook, so we need to actually change this. So go here, and we need to find this chat input. There we go. And now we can go here and we can actually change the last two. Let's click the schema. Let's give it the correct session ID, which is on our webhook. So here we have our session ID. Let's also fix the user message, which is here. And now if we execute this workflow and we go to Google AI Studio and tell them this again, we can wait and see if you actually get a response. So we actually got a response, but as you can see we're passing too much. We just want to give it the system reply, so let's open this. What we want to do is go here, we want to change this, and we want to change this to actually answer with a text, and the text will be just the system reply, and this should work fine. So if you go to our Google AI Studio and we actually refresh the page, which you can do here, let's reload this. Make sure to run the webhook. And now let's ask it and see if we get a response back. Okay, we can see we now got a response. Let's try and continue the conversation. Something like this. You can see we got an error. Again, the error is because the webhook was not running. Let's run it again. Let's send a response. And there we go. We can see there's also some weird formatting. I'll solve this in a minute. But we can see this is working. If we go to our data table and refresh, we are now seeing the new conversations here. So this is working fine. Let's just do some quick fixes. First, let's actually give the production URL. So I just gave it the production URL, and then I said, and make sure the reply is correctly formatted. It looks like this, and then I just copied and pasted the format so that it knows how it is, and it can actually fix it. Let's send it and wait a bit. Okay, so it's been a bit. Let's see if it's working fine now. I'll just tell them the same message. You can see we got an error. We can just click here. Let's just click auto fix and it will try to actually fix the error. There we go. Now it's working fine. Everything is working as before, but we have an actually good looking page instead of this one. We actually have a web page that we could just then click to deploy and have a chat app for our client. Now let's do the same for the other flow. Remember, this flow basically aggregates all the conversation into a Google Sheets. But we want to change it, and instead of the Google Sheet, we want to actually allow the client to view this on a web page. So let's do the same thing. We start by removing this and creating a webhook. Just going to call it shot results. In this case, it's just a get. If this was production, we would actually want to get some sort of authentication. In this case, I'm just testing it out, so there's no need for authentication. And we want to respond with the webhook node. So get this, we'll connect it to our flow. And then we need to also change this. So we want to actually send a reply, and we'll remove this, let the response to webhook. And we'll just connect it. And now let's open, let's get our test webhook, save this, and let's execute. And now we can either start a new session, or we could actually build on the same place. I'm going to start a new session. So I'll just go here again. I am already on the build, so I'll just describe my idea. So I'll just say the following. I want you to create a stats panel for my chat conversations. For this, when the page is loaded, you should call the endpoint, and I just gave you the endpoint we just created, which will return a list like the following. And then I just copied and pasted the list. So the list from a result, I just copied and pasted there. And then at the end, I told him I want you to display the amount of conversations in a card and the meeting schedule in another. I didn't want a card for each of the conversations. So now I can just click build, making sure again you are executing this webhook workflow. So I'll just hit build and wait for a minute. It finished, and you can see it's actually still refreshing the date. This was because our flow was still running, and at the end we just got this, which is an empty page, so that might be an error. We can just click autofix and see if that fixes it. So let's just wait. Now it seems to have finished, and it's once again trying to actually get data. You can see our flow is running. Let's just wait for it to finish and actually reply. And now we can see we have one conversation and the conversation summary. And the reason for just having one conversation is because we're actually sending 10 items and then responding with just the first. So we should open this, we should do reply all incoming items. And now if you just execute the same workflow and we refresh the page, it should give us all the items that we actually have. There we go, you can see we have 10 conversations, only one meeting scheduled. You can click here and see the meeting outcome. We can see we actually have the meeting schedule here. So this is the outcome, and the dates, and if there was a meeting or no, highlighted in green. This is almost done, but you can go a step further because this UI is good, but it looks very AI generated. So what we want to do is to actually go to Pinterest. We want to go to search and search something like this. Analytics dashboard, so just pick some we want. Let's say we want something like this one. So I'll just copy this image. And I'll drag and drop it to Google AI Studio and ask it to make the design more similar to this one. We just send and wait again. So you can see it's now finished and it's using some sort of mock data. That is because our webhook was actually the test one. We need to put it live so that you can actually get all the data. So you go here, you open, you click the production URL and you copy, and don't forget you need to save it to actually take effect. So now I go to Google AI Studio and I'll tell him change this webhook endpoint, and I'll just send this with our production webhook. Okay, now it's done. We can see it's actually getting the data and our flow should be running. We can go to the executions to see the actual production executions. And it's actually running here. Still refreshing, so let's wait. This needs to finish. It finished with success. So if you go to our AI Studio, we can see we have here a bunch of conversations. I think it's still using mock data. So let's tell them to not use mock data. I'll just send and wait again. There will be a lot of sending and waiting, but that is just part of the process. We can see it's now working. There are still some weird stuff like saying visitor, but basically you can see we now have the actual details, the info, the outcome, and we actually have the conversations and the meetings scheduled. So lastly, I'll just ask it to simplify the app to be something that could be used. I just told them to simplify the page, remove the side and top bars, and only keep elements that you are actually using. Let's see what it actually has for us. There we go. Now it's much better. It's just showing the things we want. Let's make it full screen. And you can see this is actually much better and something we could actually leave to a customer. This was helpful. Feel free to join my school community. I'm just starting it out, so for now it's free and I'll be adding more content there. And I hope you enjoyed this video and that you actually do something with the information you got from it. Thanks for watching. See you soon.